and happy Friday. My name is Nicole, and I'm the program manager for online training here at Glidewell. Thank you for joining us. We have an exciting panel discussion lined up for you today on planning your practice growth in 2024. Our business advisory panel today is Dr. David Hochberg, Dr. Roger Levin, Dr. Neil Park, and MK. We have a special guest joining us today, Chuck Cohen from Benco. Thank you, Chuck, for being here today, and thank you to Benco Dental for the continued support of this online study club. I have a few announcements before we get started. In order to get your CE certificate, please fill out the survey that's going to appear as a pop-up once this webinar is over. If you miss this pop-up, don't worry, you will also receive an email tomorrow with the link. And as a reminder, these CE certificates are not sent out until next Wednesday. If you have any questions for any of our panelists, please place your question into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we will make sure to get to it. And last but not least, we have all of our dates for the Glidewell Symposium. We have 7 incredible opportunities to learn about dentures, implants, aesthetics, digital dentistry, and so much more. You can pre-register for any of our events by going to glidewellsymposium.com, and we hope to see you next year. Let's get this started. I'm gonna turn things over to Dr. Neil Park.
Well, thank you, Nicole. And Nicole, you've done such an amazing job with this webinar, and we all appreciate the great work that you do. And welcome everyone to this special edition of the Glidewell Online Study Club. As you may remember, we started this back in March of 2020 as an emergency response to the COVID pandemic. And then I had the cooperation of the whole team at Glidewell, and we put together this amazing panel of experts, and we started doing webinars. We started daily, and then we moved to weekly, and we wanted to provide immediate and current advice to help dentists in this country get through those very strange times. And then when things settled down, we added a clinical lecture to the format to give you some good, solid clinical CE. And now it's 3.5 years later, we stayed with the same format. We start with a quick visit with our business advisory panel for their updates, and then we move on to a clinical lecture. And the response from all of you has been just amazing. It's so gratifying. We have more than 40,000 dentists who've participated, a total attendance of more than 200,000. And what's really kind of fun is that 3.5 years later, the average weekly attendance is higher than when we started doing this during the pandemic. So we appreciate that very much. And so for today's special anniversary webinar, we've got our regular business advisory panel along with a special guest, and we're all here to help you plan your practice growth for 2024. So let me get started by going around and quickly introducing the panel. And each panelist will present some key ideas, and then we'll take your questions. So go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A. Let me know who you want me to ask that question of, and we'll have a nice discussion. The panelists are going to quiz each other. And that panel is, first, Mary Kathryn Williamson. She is a CPA and part of the dental group at Aprio, a national accounting firm. We have Dr. David Hochberg, a wise and experienced general practitioner from Atlanta, Georgia. We've got Dr. Roger Levin, the founder of the Levin Group, a highly respected practice consultant in the field of dental practice management and practice growth. We have Chuck Cohen, the managing director of Benco, the largest private distribution company in the dental industry. And unfortunately, Gary Pritchard, who is our attorney, he had an urgent family matter and he's unable to be here today. So we'll do our best to carry on without him. So let's get started. And first up is Dr. David Hochberg.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are watching from. And it's a pleasure to be here again. And Neil, this thing wouldn't have flown an inch without you. So we all thank you for the fine work that you've done. Okay, my topic today is creating a high-performing dental team. And I'd added a little addendum to that. And it's really a high-performing dental office. As I was preparing, it was hard to separate the high-performing dental team from the high-performing patients, because the dental team attracts that patients. Those patients demand the services of the dental team. And I kept going around in circles. So what I think I'd like to do is, although one could speak for hours, we're going to do this quick in 5 to 8 minutes. I got some bullets of each, and I'll break it up into patient and team, and we'll see how that plays out. The first thing is always remember that everything is about the patient in the very beginning and in the very end. It starts and stops with them, and the family atmosphere that you create is held amongst the patients, and it's also held amongst the team. You don't do things separate and wonderful for the patients and not separate and wonderful for the team, because they're like magnets and they attract the same. It's all about excellent customer service, and we're going to talk about, like I said, the patient first. When the patient walks in your office, they've just hired you. You're working for them. And that needs to be your kind of mindset as you go through your careers. I'm sure we have people that have been practicing for a short time, and we have people that have been practicing for a long time, like me, but they've hired you. And since it's all about the patient, it's all about that excellent customer service that we give. And I really should pause, because over the years, there are two different practices that have developed. There's a traditional full fee of service practice, and then there's a managed care practice. And sometimes the discussions are separate, but the person and the patient is simply the same. How they pay for their services, that's a separate discussion. So you need to always remember that you need to treat that person who's a patient in the exact same manner, no matter what model of service you're providing, because that patient has friends and family and brother-in-laws and sister-in-laws that aren't in their network. And they can refer a full fee of service patient to your practice that is interested in a dentist that shows that empathy and that concern and that importance on relationship. So you want to make it personal from the very beginning. And that's with a voice. We text, we email, we confirm electronically, but your patient also needs to bond with your front desk. And they will if you do it correctly. They hear a voice, it's identified with a name. And in my office right now, oh, listen, can I speak to Sharon to schedule that appointment? I have 3 other people up at the front, but they have a relationship with Sharon. And when they schedule that appointment with Sharon, they're not breaking an appointment at the last minute to hurt Sharon's feelings. They would never. They break an appointment with me before they break an appointment with Sharon. So that bond is there. And when you see your patients raving about a specific team member, hey, you've started to cross that finish line. And that's very, very important, because that personal relationship is effective amongst all the items in your office. Know your patient. Make sure everybody can welcome them by name. They all have a name. And when they go into the reception room, it's not from the other side and they're waving to them a mile away. You enter the reception room, you stand up, you greet, and you start talking then. It's a casual discussion because they know their assistant. You leave them, you bring them into the room, and they're in their den. And it's a really wonderful feeling when you can experience that. How about the evening follow-up call? What's that? 90 years ago, even before Roger was in the business, there was some lady, I don't remember, it could have been Linda Miles. I don't really know who it was, but she said, hey, listen, you got to call your patient in the evening. And I said, oh, that's crazy. What are you talking about calling him in the evening? But it was soon that I understood, when you take an 1.5-inch needle and you do a mandibular block, and that needle looks 7 feet long, and you insert it through muscle and tissue until it hits the lingual of the mandible, that patient could be a little tender that night. And all you do is, this is the call. Hello, Sally. This is David Hochberg. Just wanted to reach out. Want to make sure you're comfortable and doing well. Oh, and by the way, I'm back in the office tomorrow morning. If you need me, just give us a call. Look forward to seeing you next time. Today, it's a message on a phone. It used to be somebody would pick up the phone and yell across the room, Mom, it's the dentist. You got this, popal announcement. And let me tell you, it really works. Patients think about it to this day. Call me old fashioned, but if you spend 2 hours with a patient and they just hear a little bit of a phone call, they know that you care about them. Elderly patients. I'm in a high-rise building. I'm on the 12th floor of a 25-story tower. Meet them downstairs if you want them to continue to come to you. Get an extra person, get your wheelchair down, escort them up. It's easy peasy, and they will stay with you forever. Another item on the patient side is let them know when you take CE. Let them know when you take your time off on a Friday to spend time with us. It's an investment in their oral health, and they should know that you're committed to it. And also, you finish a procedure, whether it's a composite or a lateral entry sinus graft, your assistant should be trained to simply say, Dr. Hochberg, that looks great. If it's quiet on the other side of the chair, I get to say, Sally, what do you think about that? Which is my nudging of telling him, hey, why aren't you complimenting my care? You can't do it yourself, or at least it doesn't really look right. And the patient feels good about it. Then they give him the mirror, and you've crossed the finish line with that. There's something called a get well card or a thinking of you card. Your patient calls, can't come, they're having a hip replacement. It's not an, oh, well. Make sure your staff puts a get well card on your desk. It takes me 2 seconds. So-and-so, hey, hope you're feeling better, up and around. We look forward to seeing you next time without a walker, whatever. But let them know that you're thinking of you. I send get well cards, thinking of you cards, and sympathy cards. If a patient was in your practice for 20 and 24 years and a spouse passed away or something horrible happened in their family, remember, you're not just the person who fixes the corners of their teeth. You've become a professional/friend, and they love to hear about that from everybody. Certain states, another line item, I'm rolling here, is in certain states, you don't have to provide a dental hygiene examination. You just don't. And I think many dentists think, oh, that's the best thing since sliced bread. I can't stand checking hygiene anyway. I'm not going to go in. 2 things to remember. Number one, you don't get paid. You have to go, you have to show to do the exam to get compensation. The second thing is, if you don't see him once, you're not going to see that patient for a year. And if you don't see him twice, you're not going to see that patient for 2 years. If you want them to forget who you are, don't check their hygiene. That's the message there. Okay. Meet your expectations of your patients with words and actions. And it's all about building trust and confidence. No trust and confidence, you got nothing. Okay. Let me blow through a little bit on the employee side. Dream team employees. It's the hardest thing you will ever do in your life, let alone in your practice. Dentists have to manage staff. What is that? Businesses have an HR department that manage employees. Dentists just fix teeth and perform services to help their oral health. Well, not us. We're in the HR business, and it's the hardest thing to do. It never stops, and it starts with the most important thing, an office manual, okay? And it has to be detailed. It lists everything that your office does or doesn't do, and will remove something that I call chaos, okay? For example, if you need a 3 months notice for your hygienist to give you a request to have a week vacation, it's in the manual. You just didn't create it. And now if they ask for a week notice, it's easy, give them their request back with a page of the manual. It doesn't mean that you can't be flexible about certain things, but it keeps things within a norm. I never block off my book, a week total, a week in advance. So why should they, you walk the walk, talk the walk, and let your manual be the consistent fairness in your office. My next thing was interviewing. interviewing. In order to get the team, you got to interview the team, and dentists are notorious for not being good interviewers. Not everybody is. In the beginning, I did all the talking. That's the sign of a bad interviewer. You don't want to be doing all the talking. You want them to be doing the talking. You have to learn to have your questions written down. They're the same questions for whatever position you're hiring. It's the answers that differ. The questions have to be open-ended. It's not a yes or no. Then there's no discussion, and it's very quiet in that room. So if you want to ask them a question about, so tell me, what do you think about, being part of a team, and why is that important in a dental office? Well, that gives lots of room. If they simply say, well, oh, I'm a team player, it gets very quiet in the room. You don't have the obligation to speak. But you could say, oh, well, that's great to know that. Give me an example. Then they get to talk, and they get to give you an example. Give me an example is my favorite question after whatever they say, okay? Because sometimes they're nervous and they need to be directed a little bit, and you want to see their speech pattern. You want to see, can they actually converse, carry on a conversation? I'm not so much interested in their answer. I want to see if there's some sort of a back and forth, which would take place when I'm not in the room, on the clinical side, or at the front desk over the phone. My next favorite thing, it's all my secrets, guys, is, and this is my game changer. If I'm interviewing for a front desk and they're in my office and the office name is Colony Square Dental Associates, I say, Ms. Smith, I'm so glad you're here for this interview. Listen, I want to see how you answer the phone. Ring, ring. And they look at me like now? I said, yeah, ring, ring. And sometimes they say, yes, hello, this is Sally at Colony Square Dental Associates. How may I help you? That's all you want to do. Some of them could actually say, hello. So give them a chance to show you what they can do, or what maybe that they're just not able to do or not a match. And this way you don't get surprised on the Monday they show up to work and you say to yourself, what did I bring to the plate? And then it's about constant training. You never stop. The CE goes on forever. The word choices that need to be had in communicating to patients. The scripting you've heard Roger talk about endlessly. It's painful, but it's painless when it's done correctly. Make sure you have an annual performance review. I get people that interview, I haven't gotten a raise in 3 years. And I say, what is that? You want to have a performance review. It's not a surprise. If there was something horrible during the year, you've had that discussion, but it just makes them feel a little bit appreciated. And especially in today, where there is virtually no one to hire, don't give a raise that's embarrassing. Okay, you'll hear from your accountant. God bless Aprio. I've used them for almost 40 years. They go over my balance sheet and they tell me the percentage of my salaries and it's too high. Well, that doesn't mean I'm paying them too much. It just means I'm underperforming. There's value in their positions. So that means, David, you better do something to practice, because you're not going to pay them less. And let me tell you, if you don't hold that line today, they will be gone. And Roger can tell you how expensive it is to replace a team member that would have dwarfed the amount of the raise that you should have given that would have been respectable. Create an environment, and now I'm done, for them to have a career. If they're sitting in the job, they're going to treat it like a job. If they're part of a family, then they have a commitment to it. They have a commitment to you, to your patients, and also to their coworkers. And you can't live with them, and you can't live without them. I don't know who said that. It was a joke.
So much good knowledge from experience.
I'm done.
It's funny, David, because I think when I first went into practice, I thought, hey, I'm a dentist, and all this staff stuff is a distraction from what I'm supposed to be doing, which is fixing teeth. And then I finally realized, no, actually, this is my job. managing this team, leading this team. That's my actual job, and all this other dental stuff. That just goes along with it. And I think your many years of success are testament to that. And another thing I just wanted to point out, you started talking about your staff, and you immediately went right into patient care, patient relationships, how you deal with patients. And I think for you, no matter what it is you're talking about, it's always about the patient for you. And I think people can learn, because that is your motivator, is taking great care of your patients. No matter what phase of dentistry you're talking about, it's always about your patients. How do you get your staff to have that patient-centric motivation that you so clearly have?
Well, sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. That's the honest answer. First of all, every month we have a team meeting. It's agenda driven. And over the years, I was always the creator of that agenda. And I decided, well, that's, after 40 years of team meetings, I could take out a team meeting from September of 1997, and it really hasn't changed. The same things are working. You still have patients, you still have procedures, and you're still doing everything. So I have a team meeting, and I have them fill out parts of it now. They have to have it to me a full week before it, just so that it's not something crazy and I don't want to include it, and they feel a part of it. I have 3 departments that they reply in. One is the business team, the other is the dental assistants, and the other is the dental hygiene. And they give me a topic that they want to present to the team, which goes over much better than them hearing it from me. When somebody else says it, they listen. When I say it, it takes a little bit of coaxing sometimes. And so I think consistency and having that there is part of that answer.
Very good. Thank you so much.
I have a comment, Dr. Park.
What's that?
I have one comment.
Go for it.
So as a hygienist, I would call my patients afterwards if we did a SRPs, and I just have to comment that it elevated my relationships with them. They found a huge benefit from it, and they were appreciative, and we were able to have post-op conversation afterwards, and it was great. And the next time they came in, I could see the difference. So I encourage your hygienist to call.
They were linked to you. They didn't want to have anybody else on the planet take care of their dental hygiene except for Nicole. That's great.
Anybody else comment? Well, let's move on to MK Williamson, and she's going to talk a little bit about tax strategies for the end of the year and for the upcoming 2024.
That's right. Thank you, Dr. Park. And David, just great helpful hints. I will say, as a patient myself, for my dentist, I have a wonderful relationship with my hygienist, and then obviously the dentist in general. And sometimes they're like, okay, you need to leave now. It's time to stop talking and catching up on life. So it really does just make it go the extra mile. But so, hi everyone, happy Friday. Hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. We are officially in holiday mode. I cannot believe it's December 1st. So I want to share with you all, which some of this may be some repeat topics, but I want to just keep the conversation going and reminders for you. So as I have my year-end planning meetings with my practice owners, I would like to just share with you the sequence that I go over things. And so the first and foremost, which kind of touches on something that David said, so great segue, David. The first and foremost is getting behind those practice numbers. This is the first thing we go over in my meetings is let's look at the financials. Where are we through October? Where are we through November? Because this is our starting point. This tells the story. Everything will fall out underneath those numbers of what's going on in the practice. So since we do the accounting work for most of our practices, this is where we start, is year-to-date numbers. I have 3 different reports I go over with my practice owners. We always start with monthly. Let's look at our trends over a monthly basis. The second report is let's look at how we are doing compared to 2022. So we'll go over 2023, pull in those 2022 numbers. Hey, look at this collections. You did go up, or hey, the staffing costs went up, but this is why. And then that third report is let's go over those industry standards, which David touched on, that really ties it all together. This is where you are trending and comparing against those industry trends. And is it in line with the goals that you have set for yourself and your practice? It's always good to see this side of the financials and to go over in detail, because at the end of the day, what do you look at the most as a practice owner? You look at your cash flow. So does the profit that I'm sharing with you that leads to your tax picture, does it match up with the cash flow that you've experienced over the year? Once we review those financials, we get comfortable with that number. I always, I have the kind of the same spiel every time. I'm like, this is my starting point. So this is where you're standing from an overall profitability standpoint. And then we back into the tax picture. And so once we review those financials, we move into the tax side, because granted, at the end of the day, your practice is generally your biggest wealth driver. And what does that drive? That will drive the overall taxes that you have to pay. So my question is, what does that mean for 2023 taxes? Well, in the best CPA fashion, we love to say it depends. Depending on where that taxable profit number stands will determine the tax strategies that we can put in place from now until the end of the year, or hey, let's go ahead and start talking for next year, 2024. So first and foremost, and I think I brought this up in October on one of the webinars I spoke to you guys on, was let's start with equipment purchases. Let's start with what are any bigger purchases, if any, are on the horizon? Because does it make sense to go ahead and purchase this scanner this year, or do we need to wait until 2024? So really balancing, what am I estimating for taxes? What's the profit? And cash flow permitting, should we go ahead and purchase it now, or do we need some extra deductions that we can push into 2024? If you have a higher profit, then you realize purchasing equipment and having it installed and in service, you would need to have that done before December 31st, because those are the IRS and tax rules that has to be put in place for us to get that full write-off. So if we're showing a higher profit, let's go ahead and start talking about some things that are necessary and ordinary for the practice to implement. If they're not necessary, then we don't want to spend cash just to spend cash. We can wait until next year. I always encourage my practice owners to keep a running list of things that you want and need for your practice. You can start chipping away on those improvements and investments for your practice when cash flow permits. But more importantly, like I said before, is it necessary right now for the practice? We never want, this is a famous CPA saying, so maybe you've heard it, we never want the tax tail to wag the dog. We want any end of year spending to be necessary. We don't want you just to spend. Another amazing tax saving strategy that usually has a 1-year impact, but it can be an insanely tax saving strategy, is called a cost segregation study. So this goes out to my practice owners that have purchased your real estate, or you're thinking about purchasing your real estate, so the building that your practice is in. If you are eligible, or if you have done so, then you're eligible to do a cost seg study in that initial year. By doing this study in the first year, you are allowed to offset your practice income with the depreciation that you can get from doing this study. So a cost segregation study basically breaks up your purchase price and allows you to accelerate a big chunk of that in that first year. So you get a big old deduction that lowers that overall taxable income, which then saves you a ton in taxes. So if that is something that you're thinking about, I would continue the conversation with your CPA. If you've already done it, let's go ahead and see, hey, what was my purchase price? Does a cost seg make sense for me for 2023? And I'm pretty sure it will. The next thing, so after we tackle equipment and bigger purchases, I'll always bring up retirement, which you've all heard me talk about retirement, but it's one of my favorite ones, because why wouldn't you prefer to give your money not to the government and into a savings account, your retirement fund that'll fund you later in life? So question to ask, do you currently have a retirement plan in place? If so, is it a traditional 401k that always has the option to add on an additional component called a profit sharing plan, which I'm sure most of you are very familiar with? So is that something that it's time to explore? What would that look like for you? So as a business owner, you are allowed to contribute up to $66,000 a year to a retirement plan. And the best part of it is that it is fully deductible for your practice. And so you get a tax deduction for that. So just another way to lower that overall taxable income number that you pay taxes on. If you don't have a retirement plan in place and cash flow does permit, go ahead and get one started for 2024. It's time to now have the conversation to get one in full effect to start on 1/1. What a great way to bring an added benefit to your team while putting away money for your future as well. Another tax saving strategy that I have brought up, I think at least 3 times now on this webinar, is pass-through entity taxes, because I'm going to keep bringing it up because it is constantly talked about. I keep bringing this up because it's new and I want to make sure you are aware and that you know about it. This is a great way to bring down your practice profit as well. So this is another deduction you can take through your practice, but it's a tax payment. So you're basically prepaying your state taxes. And when I say your state taxes, it's your individual state taxes. So this does This does vary and depends on your state. So like I constantly say, make sure you're reaching out to your CPA, your advisor, to say, does this apply to me? And it does vary by state to state, like I said. So I want to make sure that this is something that is on your radar, because if so, it is a benefit. You get to deduct it through the practice. So lowering that overall income that then lowers your overall tax bill. So it's an added benefit. And then other tax planning ideas that don't necessarily involve your practice, but are more on a personal level, just some other questions to think about. More retirement. So if your practice does not have a retirement plan, your spouse does not have a retirement plan through their employer, but personally you have a traditional IRA, well, you can still contribute $6,500 a year to your traditional IRA, and you get a deduction on your individual tax return. So if a retirement plan is not on the table for the practice right now, but you still want to tuck away some money, well, let's make sure you get the tax benefit from doing so. If your overall income picture is up for 2023, what you've been working with your CPA to determine that, hey, overall income is up, and you give to charity on an annual basis, then does it make sense this year to bunch your donations? What do I mean by donation bunching? So this is a tax strategy that consolidates 2 years worth of donations into a single tax year. So this is a good way to maximize your itemized deductions in a year that your income is up. So it's another just tax planning strategy to lower that overall number to make sure you're getting the best benefit. And then I also brought this up a couple of weeks ago, but utilizing tax loss harvesting. So I'll end with this one. Is 2023 a good year to harvest some tax losses? I know the economy is a discussion for a different day, but this could be a good strategy for 2023. Tax loss harvesting, I'll remind you, allows you to sell investments that are underperforming and replace them with similar investments in your portfolio. So this allows you to offset some gains that maybe you've had with losses that obviously create some tax saving strategy. So I know I've thrown a lot at you. I could go on for a while talking about just different ways to lower income. Doesn't make sense. And it really goes back to knowing your numbers. That is my starting point. It, like I said before, it tells the story. So as you are wrapping up the year, I challenge you to think on these things. You may have already discussed several of them with your advisors and your CPA. And in that case, I hope you are good to go and you know what to expect going into next year. But as a minimum, I encourage you to know your numbers. It drives everything else and will truly help you plan as you continue to grow and excel in your practice. Like I said before, your practice is your biggest wealth driver, and we want to make sure that you're setting yourself up for continued success into 2024.
Thank you, MK. And you know, of all the great hints that you gave, I think the big lesson is tax law is far too complex for a dentist to really master. And if you're not working with a professional, you are undoubtedly missing out some great opportunities. I don't know about you, gentlemen and ladies, but I really find taxes annoying and unpleasant and would like to reduce that load as much as possible. And I know that without a professional, I'm not going to be able to do it. Anybody have any other questions for MK? Yeah, Chuck.
Yeah, so from the Benco perspective, MK, we're hearing doctors who are saying they're a little more reluctant to purchase equipment because interest rates are higher. For most dentists, they're going to have bigger return on investment than the extra point or two of interest. Can you comment on that? Are higher interest rates a reason for doctors to not buy equipment or invest in their business this year?
So that is something that we constantly weigh. That's such a great point. So we have this conversation all the time. You are investing in your practice. It will eventually pay for itself. So obviously, from the CPA accounting standpoint, you get to deduct the interest. So if it's a little bit higher, well, you're going to get to deduct it anyways and take away from that profit that you're showing. But if it's, like I said before, if it's necessary and you need it and it's going to make you more efficient as a practice owner, draw in more patients and draw that top line, it's worth it.
Great. Anybody else?
Yeah, Neil, I just have a little add-on to what you said. Everything that she said really makes so much sense, but it all goes to the fact that you need to have regular meetings with your CPA and accountant throughout the year. You'll never get surprised in December if you met in the first quarter and the second quarter and the third quarter, whatever. And Aprio, listen, they've been my folks for decades, but I always had a scheduled meeting. So there was a plan. And then if something was in my benefit to purchase, It wasn't like I'm in the last 4 weeks of December and what do I need? It was a plan that started in June, and you didn't run out of time. So just like the treatment plans we provide to our patients, there's a money plan, and dentists aren't always the best person to do it. That's all.
We never are, and our problem is that we think we are, and that's we sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So great info, MK. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And let's move on to Dr. Roger Levin. He's going to talk a little bit about your goals, implementing and tracking your goals.
Well, first, David, MK, wow. I mean, just so many great points. Thank you. Over the years of looking at advertising and marketing, probably hundreds of times and hundreds of different companies, I've seen the ad or marketing campaign that said, it's time to get serious. And that's always a great campaign because it scares you and you think things are happening. And, no matter when they put it out, they're telling you it's the time to get serious. But I really was thinking about this for today. And I think for dentistry, it's the time to get serious for real. And I'm not marketing anything or advertising. So serious means something is changing. And I try to track a lot of economic factors. The pandemic allowed people to save a lot of money so they could do dental care and they could pay for it. They weren't going to restaurants and cruises and luxury purchases and et cetera. That's kind of run out. And then there's economic data now showing that American credit cards are at the all-time high in terms of debt. And interest rates are skyrocketing. And then we have something new called buy now, pay later that's exploding in growth over the Christmas season with retailers. It's becoming more of a norm, which means that people really need another availability of credit in order to make their purchases. All of this comes back then to a dental practice. And the reason is that people will put off dentistry for certain other activities. And we are starting to get data in and see practices that are slowing down a little bit. Now, I wouldn't be concerned about that from an economic cycle, except our last survey, which was published in Dental Economics last April, and we'll do another, that was the 16th year, our 17th year is coming up, showed that practice production is relatively flat. I wouldn't be that concerned about that, except that inflation in dental practice is up at about 6.2% as a combination of staffing costs that are up 10% and other inflationary factors. So my presentation is about goal setting. Let's tie it all together. Our firm focuses on one thing more than any other single factor: increasing practice production. I've spent 38 years studying it. I'm finishing, I'm halfway through a new book. It is not for sale. I'm only halfway done on 45 ways to increase practice production. I love this book. It's just chapter after chapter. Might be out sometime late next year. So I did all the research for it. And your goal is very simple. Your number one goal is increase practice production every year. If you can do that, you're most likely going to be fine and have a great career, unless your overhead, as MK will tell you, is totally out of control. Goal setting is, and I believe this, I've been studying goal setting my entire career. I'm fascinated by it. It is the number one most powerful factor for any dentist or person to reach their true potential. And over the years, I've read so many self-help books and self-improvement books. And every year, over 1,000 new self-improvement books are published. And I'm going to tell you, you can cut through all the clutter, 38 years of experience later, and just set goals. Now, setting a goal has certain very specifics. And in a minute, I'm going to give you 9 goals to think about setting. So I'm going to give you practical practice information. But to be a goal, it must have 4 things. It must be written down. It must have a deadline. Deadlines create accountability. When you're managing a team, as David was talking about, give people deadlines or they don't know when you want it done. It must be measurable. If it's not measurable, it's not a goal. People say to me, well, I want to do more of this or less of that. That's not a goal. How much more? Give me a number, must be measurable, and then know the first step, because most people set goals and go nowhere. Now, before I get into the 9 goals you might think about for your practice, Levin Group recommends setting 10 goals every year for the practice. And the reason for 10 is so that you go deep enough. We talk about 3 large goals, 3 medium goals, 3 small goals, and 1 BHAG, BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. That's the stretch goal. That's the one you go for. But even if you don't hit it, you will be so much better off than if you never set it at all. Okay, let's get practical. I like to be practical. I try to always bring myself back to that. I am a dentist that did practice for 10 years full time, so I know that you don't want just theory. Goal number 1, what is your production goal for 2024? It must be bigger than 2023. I don't care if it's 1% or 20%. By the way, almost every practice in the United States, and Chuck, I would think you'd agree with this. If you don't, you can speak up later, has a 30 to 50% production growth potential within about 3 years. Dentists sell themselves so short in terms of reaching potential by not going for it, by falling into habit patterns, by not accessing different types of experts like MK to help them in their life. Why do you want to do anything in taxes if you're a dentist? It's not our thing any more than I'm going to go home and fix my car, which nobody knows how to do with modern cars anyway. Set your production goal for 2024. What's the percentage growth and what's the number? Now, as a good model for the general practices, which are the majority of our people listening, here's a general model. You want 75% of production to come from the doctor and 20% to come from hygiene. That's Nicole, hygienist. But we know that dentists can grow 30 to 50% in their production over about 3 years, and hygienists can grow 20% and be on track for that within about 90 days. So, and for dentist production, about 40% comes from new patients, 50% comes out of hygiene, and 10% comes from emergencies, which is kind of ironic. We let emergencies totally disrupt our practice and blow up schedules in some practices every day, and they still only add up to 10% of doctor production. And doctor production, just to reiterate, is only 75% of total practice production. Set the production goal. Number 2, once you have the production goal, set a daily production goal. As MK said, and one of our best consultants at Levin Group talks constantly about know your numbers, know your numbers, know your numbers. Whenever we bring a new consultant on board, and David, after your presentation today, I have a job for you if you want it. That was really good. No, but we take this consultant and have them train the newest people in, because we meet some great consultants that join our firm, but they have ideas and they have strategies and they have systems, but they don't focus on the numbers. You have to start with the numbers. Set a daily production goal. And tomorrow, the first thing you do in your morning meeting is, did you hit your daily production goal from yesterday? And if you don't hit it, you're not going to hit it most days. You'll be higher, you'll be lower. But as day after day goes on where you're below goal, you're starting to get a pattern. Just like you want to know, start talking about your taxes in June, you want to start talking about your production in January. You don't want to wait. We get calls in November. We got calls from people who just found out that their practice is down for 2023. You should never be surprised by your numbers. Number 3 is hygiene production. You can increase it by 20% by catching up x-rays and fluoride, by doing more sealants, by talking cosmetic dentistry, by talking about implants. And then the biggest one is just so old. David, it's like the evening phone call. That's a 40-year-old strategy that the majority of dentists do not do, and so is periodontal disease. In fact, I think the new research shows it's been around for about 5,500 years. I'm kidding about that, but it's been around forever. And yet it's one of the top 10 fastest ways to grow practice production in a general practice. Just diagnose and treat periodontal disease. I mean, the reimbursements are higher, the patient benefits, everybody wins. Number 5 is production per service. You're going to bring in new services. You can bring in night guards from Glidewell. You can bring in implants. You can bring in sleep. You can bring in so many different types of services. And by the way, most practices, the dentist spends a lot of time and effort and money MK, you see this, they're out of the practice 20 days studying a new area that they want to get proficient in. Then now they have the skills, and then they go back to the practice and wait till patients find them. The return on investment is awful. You need a marketing and communications program on any new service you bring in. You start with your patients, you educate them, you look leading edge. People know you have it. It's great. But then you need to measure, what is my production per service? Because some services have much higher profit margins. And in the end, profit is what creates income, and income is what gets you retired. And the average retirement age of a dentist today, according to our data, Levin Group, is 72 years of age and getting longer. And that's really serious, because I just read this morning, I don't want to be depressing, I read this in the Dental Economics newsletter, that the newest study out of California is that hourly fees per dentist will be dropping in real dollars by $14 an hour over the next 10 years. That means a lot of practices are going to have a lot less disposable income and profit. You don't want to be there. You can have an incredible practice if you do the right things and you implement the right goals. Number 6 is new technology. Chuck, I know you love talking about that. I'm doing research now. I do deep research projects, usually about a year, on workflow technology, not from the clinical standpoint, but from the efficiency, delegation, maximize opportunity, even decrease the need for staff standpoint, from the practice management perspective. And I am really impressed with what I'm learning. Workflow is going to be the future. Yes, it's expensive when you buy it. Of course it is. So are most things. And yes, you can get deductions, and you talk to MK about tax benefits, etc. Forget the tax. I mean, the tax benefits are great. I don't care about that. I don't do tax. I can tell you one thing. If you do it right, I care about ROI, increased practice production every year, and workflow will do that and take huge stress off the doctors. We have one doctor who I interviewed recently as part of my research. He has reduced his steps in a certain procedure from 11 doctor steps to 4. The staff is doing the other 7. And when they get it wrong, you can go back and rescan it. You can redigitize it. It's not some catastrophic mistake where you sent your terrible impression to Glidewell, and then they have to call you and tell you, we can't work with this. You need to do it again. You get to fix it right then and there. And I have a saying, anything reversible is okay. Anything you do in life, if you can reverse it, it's okay. Just rescan it. No big deal. Number 8 is your systems. This is the biggest one of them all. Your practice success will be directly proportional to the quality of your systems. And when you set your goals, what systems do you need to improve? And it usually starts with scheduling. 99% of our management clients, maybe 96%, I'm making up that number sort of right now, but almost all of them start with scheduling, because time management controls all other systems. We see so many practices that have schedules that are keeping them from growing. And the doctors say to us, well, I'm so busy, I can't do anymore. No, you're busy because that's the way you designed your schedule. As soon as we mathematically redesign it, there's 30% capacity. It's right there. Neil, you said something, we often don't know what we don't know. I would just change that a little bit and say, I never know what I don't know. I just accept that there are a lot of things I don't know. And if you've got a schedule and you're listening to me today, assume it's wrong. Assume it's old. Assume it's out of date. If I'm wrong for a few of you, wonderful, congratulations. For most of you, I'm going to be right. A new schedule opens time. Time opens more patients. We sell chair time. We sell it at different dollars per hour, but that's what we sell, chair time. And lastly, I want to say it again, because when I give seminars, I say it 5 or 6 times, that goal of increased practice production every year is the critical goal. Because if you do everything else wrong, if you ignore the other 8 things I just gave you, but your production keeps growing, let's say you're lucky, you're in a great area, or you have great insurance, or you have low competition. High production makes up for lots of sins. So I think you should do all 9, but if you only do 1, if production's growing, you're going to be okay. And when you tie that back to MK and tax savings and the strategies David gave you, and Chuck is always a phenomenal presenter, You put this all together today, you could increase your practice 50, 60, 70%. Now, last comment, most of you are saying, Roger, I bet you're right, but not for me, because I'm the exception. And here's what I've learned. You're probably not. And I wish you a wonderful 2024.
Thank you so much, Roger. Part of increasing production, which of course is the most important strategy, is adjusting your fees. And I've got a couple of questions here from our attendees, and they're related. One is, how can I negotiate fees and increase them with insurance companies? And the other one is, how do I get out of these PPOs? I mean, talk to me a little bit about the strategy for raising your fees.
Yeah, so let me answer you the way I answer a lot of questions, and I'll get very practical. I start with philosophy, and Chuck and David, you feel free to comment. But philosophically, the longer I'm doing this job, and we've worked now with over 30,000 dentists, I'm getting more and more black and white, because nuance and theory and ideas, that's all great, but it doesn't grow practices. And here's the black and white. Raise your fees at least 5%. If you're afraid to raise your fees every year, especially now with inflation is running higher, if you don't raise your fees 5%, then you better go look at your customer service, because your customer service isn't good enough. But what really happens, Neil, is that people get afraid to raise fees because they think their patients are going to leave. Nobody's leaving you for 5%. Nobody knows your fees except for their prophy fee and maybe their x-ray fee. They don't know what David's implants cost. You raise it $50. Nobody goes, well, wait a minute. I heard that 5 years ago, for example, we had a dentist who literally called us earlier this year and had spoken to us 20 years ago. And remember, and he had notes on the fee he was quoted 20 years ago. He wanted to know if he could still get that fee. I mean, literally, this actually happened. Chuck, I sent him to you. So the bottom line is you've got to raise your fees. Now, there are two factors. One, don't be afraid and improve your customer service every single year. You should always be focusing on service. But number two, half your patients, if they're insurance covered, that raising fees doesn't matter. Those fees aren't going up. Submit those fees every time to the insurance company, and don't just submit your new fee schedule. Call and ask who you need to talk to, not the person who answers the phone, and ask a dental director to look at your profile and consider raising your reimbursements and get back to you. And if they don't get back to you, get back to them. It actually works, not every time by any means, but it actually works. In terms of PPOs, here's the real problem. You've built a model, and if you're 50% PPO, you're not going to get out of that anytime soon, because you've built a model that's 50% dependent on PPO. So if you have a small amount of dental insurance, increase your fee for service patients, and as that goes up, decrease your participation. If you are locked in, and I would say if you're over 20% of your revenue from any one plan, I'm going to call that locked in. It can be dangerous to get out all of a sudden. Then you learn how to manage dental insurance patients with higher efficiency. David, you said something interesting. Treat every patient equally, and I agree with that from a clinical standpoint. But in terms of the model, if you have insurance patients, then you need to be more efficient than ever, because you're going to make up the difference on volume. And yes, if you open up that schedule, if you grow the capacity, if you're more efficient, if the hygienist is doing more, if you have better technology, I mean, workflow is the future. AI is going to be part of workflow. This is the future. In orthodontics, general dentists aren't even in this game yet, but we have orthodontists now using remote monitoring for aligners. They're seeing patients every 22 to 24 weeks, and the cases are beautiful. And they're talking to patients, but they're talking to them virtually in between those visits. We have orthodontic practices today that have full-time virtual coordinators that talk to the remote patients, because remote monitoring can give you over 100 data points on the case after patients send in their scans that they do at home on their phones with an attachment. And general dentists will be getting that as well. That opens up. We have doubled and tripled the capacity of some of these practices, and this will then play into general dentistry. And because when general dentists are involved in ortho, they're way behind the orthodontist, but they're going to catch up pretty quickly. So efficiency for those insurance patients is the maximum approach to take for best results.
Thank you so much. Anybody else? Yeah, David, go ahead.
Yeah. Nobody, Roger has all the stats, and it's incredible because that question about how do I get out of a PPO, I wouldn't know how to answer that, having never been involved in that side of the practice. I have a traditional practice, it's full fee for service. But in my naivete, if I do a crown for an 100% dollar amount and I'm in a PPO and I'm doing that same crown for 50% less than it, okay? However busy I am, and if everything's about production number, I produce the same thing on half as many patients.
Right.
So I just have that in my head. Getting out of a PPO isn't like a light switch, but if every one of your dollars in your office, hygiene, doctor, are at a 100% fee that you set, and the 50% less than, I see a way out without being devastated. But that's at my night. In other words, I'd have to do 2 crowns for my one to post the same revenue.
Right. But I mean, as Roger said, if you've got a practice where 50% of your revenue is coming from these kinds of plans, well, you can't just drop it, right? So Roger, what about tapering off? Okay, like at the end of the year, I'm going to drop 2 of the 10 plans, and the next year I'm going to drop 2 more and fill them with full fee patients. Is that a reasonable strategy?
It is, and I'll be quick because I know we want to get to Chuck, but there are 2 factors. One, make haste slowly. If you're going to drop plans that are more than a few percentage points of your revenue, find a way first to replace those patients. So David, there are 2 things I'll add to what you said because it's all true. Number one, yes, you can have half the patients and do twice and do the same revenue if you have enough patients. We have clients who are 60%, 70%, 80%, even 100% PPO. And by the way, some of them do very well. They just do it on high volume. But here's the point that nobody ever talks about. PPOs cover overhead. So let's say your fee is reduced by 40%. You're only getting 60%. Well, that's 60%, and let's say your overhead is 60%. Those patients are contributing toward you paying your overhead. And this is where MK comes in. If you just drop that plan and all of a sudden, 18% of your practice disappears, then you're going to have trouble covering overhead. Your overhead percentage is going to go way up. So I like what Neil said in that you've got to do it slowly, and you've got to tailor down the PPO as you build up the fee-for-service patients. Here's my main thing. Knee-jerk reactions are usually bad, and emotional decisions are the worst decisions human beings ever make.
Right. You don't want to come back from a weekend seminar and go, that's it, I'm done with third parties, and I'm going to be 100% fee-for-service, because that is a frightening and scary thing to do. All right. Now let's go to the main event here. Chuck Cohen, the managing director of Benco, and let's talk a little bit about a business plan.
So first of all, not the main event, just batting cleanup on this august panel.
Is that like Wally Pipp? Remember our Wally Pipp?
No, we did have the Wally Pipp conference. This is another baseball analogy, but here's the thing. I think I only need 1 pitch. Some other people need more pitches. It's all right. No worries. I'll be quick. So we're talking about practice strategy today. The dirty little secret is that every practice owner has a practice strategy. Most of them never articulate. So really my advice to you guys to everybody on this call, as we start the new year, is what would happen to your practice if everyone on your team understood what your strategy was and where you're trying to go. So my advice for you as you start the year is take a few minutes and articulate your practice strategy. Is it to be the friendliest office in town? Is it to be the best family-oriented practice? Is it to be the PPO driver? Is it to cater to elderly patients? I don't really care what the strategy is. It's more about figuring out what it is. It's up here somewhere for most practice owners. Taking the time to articulate it, actually write it down, and then review it with your team and ensure that everyone on your team knows where you're going and how you're going to get there. It's the difference between you pulling The practice owner pulling the cart himself or herself and getting everyone on the team pulling the cart or rowing the boat in the same direction. That's my advice as we start 2024.
That's great. I mean, and that fits into a lot of what Roger and David were saying about, meeting with your staff, making sure everybody's on the same page. And I'm going to go back to what David was talking about being so patient focused. And I think it's really easy to motivate your team when they understand that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to take good care of these people and then we're all going to be successful doing that.
I go back to what Dr. Hochberg said about scripting and Dr. Levin, because, as an assistant originally, like I was kind of reluctant to it. And then once we learned scripting and it just became so efficient. And then as a hygienist, you just roll into it and it was a game changer. It really elevates the patient experience.
Exactly. Well, panel, I think this was a fantastic session. All of you bring so much wisdom and experience to the table here, and we appreciate it very much. And thanks to the many people that have participated today and have participated over the last 3.5 years. We're gonna get out there and continue to bring you good business advice as well as good clinical advice. In fact, we're going to be back next week, and we'll have our business advisory panel, and we'll have a clinical lecture from Dr. Michelle Weddle, and she'll be talking about the importance of screening for pediatric airway issues. So you don't want to miss that. And of course, you don't want to miss these magical droplets of wisdom coming from our panel. So we will see everybody next week. Take care, and we'll continue to prepare for a great 2024. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Happy
Thank you.
holidays.